This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. Following up on last week's episode with the city manager discussing the general budget parameters here in the city of Dover, we're going to take a deeper dive and talk to the school department, executive department, public welfare, and finance departments today to learn about their budgets. First up is the school department with Dr. Bill Harbron and Chief Financial Officer Mike Lamani. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
We are trying to shed a little light on what it takes to put together a budget. And certainly the school department's budget goes through a couple different reviews at the internal level with the staff level. I'm assuming that you guys meet with the various schools, departments, put together the budget, then you present it to the school board, which ultimately approves it and then sends it on to the city council for its review. Mike, basically covering what the process is there?
I would say yes. That is the outline which is used by the city and the school district.
So what goes into putting together a budget? What are some of the things that you look at annually as you develop and work with your department heads on what ultimately becomes the budget presented to the school board?
I'm going to start that Mr. Lamani can go into other details because he basically oversees the budget process. One of the things we did this year in order to frame the budget is that we had the board establish what's the goals of what we're trying to accomplish with the budget. Last year's goal, or fiscal year 25's goal, was basically to maintain the current level of services that we have for students and also the current level of programs and operations, et cetera. This year, we expanded it a little bit to be that we're trying to enhance the core academic programming through professional learning communities. We're trying to prioritize mental health and well-being for students as well as staff, strengthening the support services. And this is trying to put the right support services in. For an example, in special education requires lots of paperwork, lots of scheduling. And so those special ed teachers' time gets eaten up doing that type of work rather than focusing on students. So the board said, let's figure out what kind of support services they need so they're freed up to do the educational service for students. We're investing in professional development. We're just coming off of ESSER 3, which we use for a significant amount of professional development as well as infrastructure within the district, and then also trying to maintain safe and inviting facilities for our students.
Mike, in general, I'm talking broad terms here, are we talking $1,000 budget, $1 million budget, a $10 million budget? What's the general scope of what it takes to operate a school district?
This not with grants, probably getting close to the $6 to $8 million a year in grants, depending on how things go. It's almost $100 million budget.
Okay.
The majority of that, close to 70% is wages.
Yep.
So we're a services business.
Right. So you need people to provide the service.
Yeah. Ultimately, the people are where the money is. We do maintain our facilities, but the core, as Dr. Harbron mentioned, those goals are delivered by people.
Right.
So sometimes those come at the expense of our facilities and maintenance, and we have transportation. So we're running one of the largest food service operations in the city. We run that with no payments from the taxpayer. So it's multiple businesses working together to provide monumental service to close to 4,000 students.
And so all those cost centers, they're evaluated, I assume, on an annual basis as you're looking to go forward. What is that process like internally? When do you start that process, and what's sort of the thought behind it?
So most of my department of the business operations, which does look at facilities, transportation, food service, human resources, and those pieces of the puzzle, we continuously evaluate them. So I talk even for the budget. So we had to submit, this budget I believe was approved by our school board on January 6th. We know that it's $2.6 million over the cap. So when we're looking at that, we're anticipating it coming back to us with some cuts. So we don't stop. We don't be like, well, it's set in stone. So we are still evaluating even the revenue sources. So we bring in tuition from other towns. We're constantly evaluating that. And we do the same thing with our operations. So part of it's through CIP. So a lot of these things are happening throughout the year. we don't stop. And our annual review, it's the same thing with employees. An annual review would be like a reflection back.
Right.
That's not that helpful.
If you waited until that point to address
Right.
concerns, you've waited too long.
Yeah, you've waited too long. And so most of the concerns that we're looking at are ongoing. So the hard part is, okay, so how do you address them? And is addressing them going to be a 10-minute decision? No, in some cases, it's a multiple year process. We've looked at infrastructure improvements for door access controls, building envelope security, cameras, et cetera, like our radios. So in making these improvements, we're fixing problems that took decades in some cases to develop. You know it's going to take multiple years. And you can't just go and be like, oh, we're going to do a little bit here, or we got some grant money here. We'll repair like a couple of these in a building. You've got to look at it in the whole envelope of security, that cameras and radios, they all talk to each other. So I think in the past, we have been looking at it on an annual budget cycle. We can't do that if you're ever going to truly improve these things. So doing capital improvement planning, using capital reserves, managing debt service in line with those is key to translating it back into what does this budget do? So if we were to reduce some of our transfers to capital reserve, we don't look at how it impacts one budget cycle, right? We're looking at how it impacts years ahead of us. So it changes the plan. So my goal is to really look at multi-year planning for huge asset groups.
I'd certainly encourage listeners to go and watch the workshop where you go into detail with the city council, or go back further to the conversations that the school board had. But if the listener needs the high-level view of some of the changes between the FY26 proposed budget and the current FY25 budget, what are three takeaways that you would look for them to be aware of?
I think a really good understanding of how a tax cap works. So we always struggle with a tax cap many people think is a budget cap. It certainly acts as a budget increase or reducer, right? So it's kind of sets the tone, but it's a cap on one revenue line. And it's our taxation. It's our local taxation, property tax for education, and for the city too. So our local property tax. Well, I think one of the takeaways for them to look at is what else funds the school district. And we've seen major swings in adequacy aid, which is a state funding source for our schools. We've seen SWEPT pick up some of that. Our local taxes have to pick up a difference. We've seen adequacy aid after the whole budget's passed and all this pain of having to go over the tax cap. Then we see, because the state budget doesn't fit our budget cycle, right? We've seen an amendment in adequacy aid, and then we get $1.6 million. That plays an emotional havoc on the taxpayer who's like, look, that's a school going over the cap again. And then now we're under the cap because adequacy aid was here. But those conversations don't line up in a neat little budget cycle, right? So we were, having to make up for a deficit. City council allowed the school to go over the cap. And then 4 months later, we're now under the cap by over 100,000. It plays games with people, though. They're like, well, how are you under the cap? You're not telling us the truth. And it's almost too complicated of a cycle, and it doesn't fit the conversation when you need to have it, that your funding changes. So, and that's just revenue, right? That has nothing to do with what you're spending the revenue on. So in part, tax cap communities spend a lot more time talking about the funding sources than they even do about the budget, because the budget's almost predetermined based on the caps of your revenue, which to me is the toughest thing in budgeting, because I'm like, let's get back to what we're spending the money on, and are we doing a good job with that? That's really what a budget cycle should be. Are you doing what we need you to do with our money?
Dr. Hartman, this is your last budget proposal here in the city of Dover. Is there anything you want to leave the listener with that's in that budget?
Well, I think what we've done over the past 3 years, when we did a reorganization of the SAU with a significant change in the teaching learning department, we're at last on a very solid course about what we want to do with learning and where we want students to be in achievement and learning. And this budget continues to perpetuate that model and continues to put an emphasis on teaching and learning, which I would predict the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a significant change in the learning levels in the Dover School District. And I think that's exciting to be able to see this department come together and really define a very strong pathway of where the district's going when it comes to student learning and achievement, with the implementation of the multi-tier system of support with professional learning communities, with good classroom ratios. That's one of the things we have to do. In fact, in this budget, we're looking at restoring some FTEs that we took away from the middle school that we just ended up not giving them what their full resources were. But I believe that we're in a very good spot to continue to move in a very positive direction for the children of this community.
I appreciate you both coming in and chatting with us about the school budget. And I encourage listeners to watch the workshop from the 20th with the City Council and also to go back and learn from the school board deliberations about the budget itself. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank
Chris.
you. Thank you for having us.
Now we're going to transition to the municipal budget and start with the executive department, followed by the finance department, and then finally have the public welfare director speak about public welfare. First up on the list today is the executive budget. I'm going to give you a quick overview. The executive department includes a city manager's office, city attorney's office, office of business development, media services, and human resources. In general, the budget doesn't have a big blip this year for this department. No new staff are being proposed or added under the proposed budget. Instead, we are looking to maintain the service levels and the projects that we have provided in the past couple of years. I can speak for myself in this and say that for the Office of Business Development, what we look at is the level of expenditures we've had in the last year and effectively take a zero-based approach of saying, if we want to continue these programs, what are the costs associated and if they are worth the return on the investment that we're making. I think the other departments and other offices do a similar role of looking at that return on investment and making sure that we're keeping our service levels high and we're keeping up with the demands that the residents here in the community have for those various areas. As might be expected, the largest area of cost for the department are personnel costs. We are a personnel-driven area, unlike maybe community services or police, where you have vehicles and equipment. Media services is probably the closest to that with their equipment that they have to maintain. But in general, we are driven by our staff needs, and we will be continuing to hopefully offer the same level of expertise and programming as well as project oversight. From a non-administrative standpoint, the executive department also includes the city council's budget. Beyond the 9 councilors, this section includes grants and subsidies that are provided to quasi-governmental agencies throughout the community. This includes Coast. It includes the Chamber and Main Street to help with fireworks and economic and beautification aspects. It also includes things like subsidies to the Dover Adult Learning Center and the school department that were established when the McConnell Center was created in 2005. These grants and subsidies are all reviewed individually as part of a request made through the city manager's office. He provides guidance to the city council, which ultimately makes a decision whether to keep those grants and subsidies in the final budget. Continuing on with our exploration of the proposed FY26 budget, Dan Lynch, our finance director, is here. Dan, how are you?
Good. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. So, what can you tell us about your proposed budget for finance, assessing, purchasing, and the city clerk tax collector office?
Our goal typically each year in development of our budget is to look at ways to streamline our operations for a couple factors. One, improve customer service, but also to limit our percentage of the operating budget. Really, we're a service entity to all the other departments of the city and try and stabilize our use of the limited resources so the other departments that have more direct involvement with the public and maintaining public facilities have the resources they need.
You know, it's interesting you say it that way because you're right. In some ways, finance is both a back of house and a front of house. The city clerk tax collector are clearly front of house operations and a portion of assessing is, but accounting, purchasing, the other part of assessing is really supporting all aspects of the other departments.
That's correct.
When you put together this year's budget, is there anything that stands out as a change from the FY25 proposal?
One significant change will be for about the last 20 years, the city's been contracting for commercial appraisal services and field data collection for assessing purposes. And we're migrating away from that primarily because in the industry, a lot of the vendors who did that, and particularly the vendor the city had been using, are going out of business. So we're transitioning back to what the city had before, which was an employee to do data collection. So they'll go out, measure, do field data validation of property attributes, throughout all the properties in the city over a 5-year period. So that'll be fun for them. And then also to have a commercial appraiser focused position to complement the city assessor, who's primarily looking at residential, and we'll have that support on the commercial side.
Any big changes in the clerk tax collector office?
The most unique area there would be probably elections.
Right.
In the current budget, the FY25 budget, we have funding for replacing the voting machines. So we're working on that process right now. The other aspect that we've dovetailed into the FY26 budget is for the accessible voting machines. So we've budgeted money there. I've heard there might be some avenues through the state to help alleviate some of that, but we wanted to plan to make sure we have the funding to comply with that statutory requirement.
So that would leave purchasing and accounting pretty much status quo there?
That's correct.
Great. Anything that the listener should know in general that you want to make sure that they're aware of about your activities or about your staff's activities?
I think what's most important is that folks recognize, one, that a lot of what like the city clerk's office does and assessing office does is directed and facilitated by a lot of state statutes. So a lot of aspects of what people come to interact with in those two offices, we don't have a lot of variables to say, oh yeah, we can do this as an option versus this as an option, because based on the statutory framework that exists for each of those areas, it's kind of, for the most part, cut and dry. Certainly the folks in both those offices look to be accommodating and provide the highest level of customer service, recognizing that folks that come to those offices are either, one, paying money for something, or their basis for paying property tax is the assessed value of their property. So in some cases, things can be a little stressful or have some anxiety, and we try to make sure that's not part of the equation and try to mitigate that and be open and transparent to what we're doing in those offices.
I appreciate you coming in this morning.
All right. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. So last up, we have Dave Balian, our Welfare Director. Dave, how are you?
Doing well, thank you, Chris. How about yourself?
Good. Appreciate you coming in, and if you could walk us through what's in the welfare budget and what you use to put together that budget when you submit it to the city manager for his review.
Sure, glad to. Basically, we kind of look at 5 major things when we're pondering what the budget will be for the next fiscal year. We look backwards to about 5 to 10 years, depending on what's going on in the budgets and the spending, to see what was in there, see how much actually went out. Then the second thing I usually do is I look at my current year-to-date spending, for this fiscal year, because we're doing the budget, creating the budget, but we're not through a budget year yet. So we're making a guess kind of at where this will go for the next few months. And then we look at cost of living. How has that changed? What is it actually right now? Not just locally, but statewide and nationally, because those trends will affect what the needs are going to be and the kinds of needs that there'll be. Things like, rent and food and utilities and transportation, those kind of general costs, what we call basic need living expenses kind of things. And then we look at what are the political trends, the legislative trends, both state and federally. Are there things that they're talking about that might affect how local municipalities might have to spend money, particularly in my area of welfare? Are there laws coming or legislation being proposed, or just kind of like the feel of it? It's hard to really get really specific about that, but it gives us an idea what might be coming down the road.
In some ways, your budget is probably most tied to the future of the economics in the surrounding area, but it's also the most at whim of general impacts regarding the economy, social dynamics, political will. But as you say and have said at your budget presentation, your budget is the one that the state says this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And providing that safety net is part of our state mandated guarantees.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it kind of difficult to do, because the state basically mandates that we do the work, doesn't tell us that there's any limit to it. And so really kind of leaves it with the hands of the municipality to come up with the money for it.
Is there anything in the public welfare budget for the next fiscal year that the listener should know is a standout, a different project or a program that maybe hasn't been in there in the past, or is it pretty much a continuation of the current year?
By and large, I'll have to say, the needs are the same year after year. So it's not a huge change. If I were to pick one thing, I would say we're probably finding ourselves people who have the need for more things like security deposits, which is a new thing for us. We didn't used to do them a few years back because usually people didn't need them. But with the high costs of rents and the low availability, we found that it's cost effective for us to help people get their foot in that door and keep them from needing our services over like a period of time. So we're doing more of them. I think that's probably the biggest noticeable change besides the fact that we're helping out with a lot more rent issues and housing issues than, but that I think is probably common knowledge for most people. I said there were 5 things that we look at, and the last one was simply we look at the job market. What's out there? Is it reasonable to expect people to be looking for work, and what kind of work is available and kind of thing? It's just all those factors that we tie in to try and figure out where are we going to go next year? Are we going to need more money? Is there a place where we can cut? I think maybe one of the things that people ought to know is that, we all know rents are higher, basic need costs are higher. We spend more time, I think, preventing the loss of housing for Dover residents than we do anything else, which is we found to be, again, more cost effective. It sounds funny to say, oh, we're going to spend money. But we've looked at it, and we've realized if we spend $1 here, we're going to save $3 there over the long run. And it's worked. I mean, I could say that because, my budget has been stable.
Well, I appreciate you coming in today, and I also appreciate you having the most humane of our departmental roles here. And I recognize the struggle you and your staff go through to both be responsive to budget needs, but also taking care of the residents that are in your office on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming in.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Want to thank Dr. Harbin, Mike Lamani, Finance Director Dan Lynch, and Public Welfare Director Dave Balian for sitting down with us today. Please check out the Budget Revealed website to learn more about their presentations, as well as the general budget discussion and deliberation schedule. You can also follow along with the Budget Revealed newsletter that comes out every week to your email box. Thanks and have a great day. Dover has a wealth of history in its over 400 years of existence. Coming up, Mike Gillis is going to share some of that history with us.
This week in 1984, a champagne bottle cracked against a massive turbine in Dover, marking a new chapter in the city's long history of harnessing the power of the Cochecho River. The February 22nd christening ceremony celebrated the revival of hydroelectric power at the historic Cochecho Falls, with then-Governor John Sununu and project developer John Webster in attendance. The project represented the culmination of 4 years of determined effort by Webster, a maritime engineer from Maine who had previously worked on supertankers for Gulf Oil Corporation. His company, Southern New Hampshire Hydroelectric, developed the facility through an innovative arrangement with the city of Dover, which retained ownership of the dam, while Webster's company operated the power plant through a long-term Federal Energy Regulatory Commission lease. The facility's 3 turbines were designed to generate 3 million kilowatts annually, providing renewable energy to the power grid. Over the decades, Webster and his brother David expanded their hydroelectric operations to include additional facilities in Claremont, Freiburg, and a smaller station on Dover's Watson Road. By 2016, their Cochecho Falls facility was producing enough power that a single generator could provide a month's worth of electricity for an average home in just 5 hours of operation. The project has not been without its challenges, including concerns about water level management and flashboard maintenance. Environmental concerns also arise periodically, including issues with duckweed accumulation that require careful management through floating booms. But the facility's durability was ultimately confirmed in 2023 when Cochecho Falls Associates received a new 40-year operating permit.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.